And I appeal to you and the world with simple and yet most important words. Combat aircrafts for Ukraine, wings for freedom.
Given just how historic that address was in the Houses of Parliament, in the Westminster Hall, addressing both Houses of Parliament, was how Boris Johnson still couldn't bring himself to back his current Prime Minister, how he still wanted to make trouble on the back of it. Within half an hour of that address, Boris Johnson was tweeting, yeah, we need to give planes and tanks and everything else that Ukraine needs right now. It wasn't a message saying just welcoming the president. It was about having a dig at his own Prime Minister. I thought that was strange.
To be putting pressure on Sunak, as if he was seeking for Sunak to go faster than he was inclined to go. And also, Lucy, Boris Johnson was there. I'm going to get your reviews of the occasion in just a second, but Boris Johnson was there. That we've seen Boris Johnson's hair. It's part of his shtick. I've never seen his hair quite like that. He made an extra effort to make it look as if he'd taken no effort at all.
I think that's right. And clearly his attempt to put pressure on Rishi Sunak on the question of providing jets to Ukraine needled him, because he was at pains, the Prime Minister, to make clear in the press conference, later in Dorset, as he stood side by side with Zelensky, that the conversation about jets didn't begin today. He said very clearly it was a conversation he had been having previously, trying to make clear he wasn't being bounced by his predecessor.
Now, what's your thought for the day?
My thought for the day was just how extraordinary it was to be there in person with the electric atmosphere in the hall. Not to make it all about me, John, but I just felt, I think as many people in the room did, this is really a moment that I will tell my grandkids about.
Well, I want to hear more about that now, then, because you were in the front row, which must have taken a bit of... Did you queue overnight? I mean, did you elbow your way to the front?
I just think I was standing in the right place in as they gathered all the journalists together. But Paul, you were right at the front of the reporter's pen as well, so we both got sharp elbows.
Well, right place at the right time. Look, give me your review of that occasion then.
Well, he is just a consummate performer. I just thought it was extraordinary. The speechwriter certainly deserves some plaudits, and given he gave it in English, just these amazing sentiments, the handing of this fighter jet pilot's helmet to Lindsay Hoyle as a tribute to Parliament, a gift to say thank you, but also to make clear, inscribed on it in Ukrainian, were the words, "We have freedom, give us wings to defend it."
Yes.
And also the way he talked about the King and said it was amazing that in the UK, the King is an RAF pilot, and in Ukraine, the pilots are kings. The kind of words that could be a little glib, perhaps a little corny in the mouth of anyone else, but for me, it just really struck a chord. It was spine-tingling.
It's one of the memories of that speech. We're going to just have a listen back to it now.
I will explain. It's the helmet of a real Ukrainian pilot. He is one of our most successful aces, and he's one of our kings. And the writing on the helmet reads, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it." I trust this symbol will help us for our next coalition of the planes, and I appeal to you and the world with simple and yet most important words. Combat aircrafts for Ukraine, wings for freedom.
Perfectly timed, perfectly delivered. Everything about that was, you couldn't fault it for effect. I thought for one awful moment, Paul and Lucy, that the speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, might actually put the helmet on. Did you share that thought for a moment? But he had the sense not to do that. Paul, what really struck you then?
What was extraordinary was how right before your very eyes was a war leader, and he kept reminding his audience, look, you're in the warmth and the comfort of the West, but every single day right now my people are suffering. And it was the repetition of just the detail of the weapons he needed, the NLAWs, the missiles, the tanks, as well as the jets. it brought home to you, as he repeatedly used the word blood as well, and it brought home to you actually what's going on right now, while many of us don't suffer any of the same things as people do. He's also a consummate, as Lucy said, a performer, but also a retail politician. And retail politician in this sense means give me weapons, give me money, give me arms. It's not just about words and international alliances. This is the hard stuff, soft power into hard power. And I thought he was just superb at doing it.
I touched on this earlier on. I can remember the appearance in that hall of Bill Clinton. Nelson Mandela spoke at Westminster too. They were both very important occasions. Nelson Mandela was widely discussed around the world at that time in his career as a living saint, and this rivaled that. And this was a guy who fits the mold of a war leader, extraordinaire. And the description would have fitted other war leaders down the decades and down the centuries. But this one has mastered the art of social media and performance art and timing and communication in various languages. He's got the humility, he's got the presence, he has the whole package. And looking at the pictures, you'll have seen it up close, guys, Lucy and Paul. The faces of those political leaders in that Westminster Hall, they seem to be the ones who were really awestruck.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Zelensky, not a tall man. So from where I was standing, as he walked into the hall and came down, you could just see a sea of mobile phones coming up, as even sort of frontline politicians, whipped out their mobiles to capture him walking in, and the applause, the whoops, the cheering. It was really quite something to see quite serious politicians sort of relegated to the sort of behaviour of squealing teenage pop star fans.
Yeah. Now, Lucy, I know right after the speech, you were round and about getting people's reactions to what they'd just been hearing. Should we have a listen to what you gathered there? I know you spoke first to Keir Starmer.
It was an incredibly powerful and inspiring speech as he talked through everything that his country is facing, and it was a real opportunity for everybody to come together, not just all parliamentarians but all parties. And I had the privilege of meeting and was able to say, and important to say, that whatever other political divides there are in this parliament, we stand absolutely united in our defence of and support for Ukraine. And so it was an incredible opportunity. I'm very pleased that he was able to come here. But he embodies the bravery and the heroism of the Ukrainian people. And it's absolutely clear that Russia has to be defeated in Ukraine. And so very, very important message from the President.
His core ask, of course, was for fighter jets from the UK and the West. Would you support the UK government giving some to Ukraine?
Wherever the government has taken action, whether it's arms, whether it's training, and I've seen some of the training down in Salisbury myself, we have supported that. I think as we go forward, it's got to be a united front with NATO, and I think it's very important we're in lockstep with NATO, and those discussions need, obviously, to continue, but everything the government's done so far, we've supported.
I'm joined now by Theresa May, the former Prime Minister. What did you make of that speech?
It was an incredible speech. It was inspirational. I think it showed the immense bravery and leadership of President Zelensky, which we have seen since February the 24th last year. And it showed the support that the United Kingdom has given Ukraine, how much that is appreciated. But it was an inspirational speech from a man who is a fantastic leader.
The core ask in that was for fighter jets. Is that something the UK government should be considering?
There were a number of issues that he raised in his speech about the support that the United Kingdom has given. We've been at the forefront of giving that support. I'm sure we will continue to support Ukraine and continue to ensure that Ukraine is on the path to victory.
I'm joined now by John Healey, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Defence. John, what did you make of that speech by Zelensky?
Historic is a word that's often overused, but this really today was an historic day. A wartime leader in the Houses of Parliament, the birthplace of democracy, and they're fighting for democracy, they're fighting for freedom, they're fighting for the future of their country. And it was a speech which made clear that Ukraine's battle is Britain's battle, it's the West's battle to prevent a dictator in President Putin who's willing to try and redraw international boundaries by force, driving a coach and horses or a battle tank through UN conventions. And Ukraine have the right to self-defense. We have the duty to help them ensure that self-defense is successful. And there was a huge wave of warmth and respect in honouring President Zelensky this afternoon.
I'm joined now by Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee and a senior Conservative MP. Graham, what was your reaction to that speech?
It was very powerful. See Westminster Hall completely full. President Zelensky there speaking very much from the heart, speaking on behalf of his people, getting a very, very warm reaction from everybody packed into the hall. It was a powerful address.
A very emotional plea for fighter jets. Do you think that's something the government should be considering in the UK?
Well, the British government has done more than any other to give support to the people of Ukraine. I'm sure all these things are under consideration. As I say, it's a very powerful address, and it was a very powerful request at the end for more support.
If they were theatre reviews, Lucy, that'd be a set of 5-star reviews. We heard there from Graham Brady, the chair of Tory backbenchers. There was John Healey, Labour's Shadow Defence Secretary, Theresa May, and Keir Starmer. And interesting, wasn't it? You pressed again and again on the question of fighter jets, and they were all keeping in step pretty much with Rishi Sunak. By contrast, Paul, with Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak is just taking his time on this. He's picking every step as he goes, not rushing into any sudden big commitment. And there doesn't seem to be a problem with that at Westminster, apart from perhaps Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I think for me it was important that Rishi Sunak spelt out in the press conference later in the day the 3 barriers to giving jets to Ukraine. The first is training, although Zelensky said, look, our pilots have 2.5 years of training, they're almost there. The second is supply chains. That isn't actually to be underestimated. These are such complex pieces of kit. If one tiny widget breaks, you can't just use a rubber band. You know, they do have huge, long logistical tails. Then there's a question mark, you know, do British engineers get involved? How do you get the parts needed to keep these planes in the sky day after day? But the third barrier to handing over planes that Rishi Sunak identified is, I think, a really important political and diplomatic one, which is that the legal provision with some of these jets, you know, they're not made by one country alone. They have different parts made in different countries. They're designed, have different design elements from different nations. There are legal requirements to get the agreement of some international partners before jets can be used in a certain way. So it needs for those allies to agree to a plan to hand over the jets before Rishi Sunak can do anything unilaterally.
Yeah, I wonder how far, Paul, that Volodymyr Zelensky can succeed in this mission of his on this visit out of Ukraine in the time that he's got to sort of, I don't know, till the earth diplomatically, given what pressure he's under as we're waiting for a Russian spring offensive at almost any time.
Well, the key thing is that Zelensky is more than aware of the time constraints upon him, and he knows that what he's really asking for right now is not an immediate supply of jets. He's thinking for the medium term and the long term, and that's quite right. But what he knows is that by bidding high for things like jets, he can then, on the lower scale of things, get more help for things like longer range missiles, armoured vehicles, more tanks. So in the short term, that's what his real prize is. And I think he's doing a very effective poker game where he's bidding high for something for the future, knowing that will put pressure on the West to deliver other things, lesser things in immediate in the next few weeks. And I think he's very canny at knowing where power lies. You know, you saw today he did big shout out for Boris Johnson, of course he did, but he did several shout outs to Rishi, as he called him. So he knows that the power has shifted to Rishi Sunak. He also, when you saw him give a big embrace to Keir Starmer and the rest of the shadow cabinet as he left, that he knows that the power may shift to another party in future. So he's very, very canny at building those alliances, not just for the short term, but for the long term. Yeah,
and meanwhile here on the home front, there is a political game being played by all the big players here as well, against the background of Ukraine. Rishi Sunak wants to be seen to be the pivotal ally to Ukraine in the Western and European alliance, and of course he's got one eye on the shadow of Boris Johnson while he's doing that. But it's not just that. It's part of marking himself out as a major player on the world stage, just as it was for Boris Johnson. And for Keir Starmer, we got a bit of this at Question Time in the House of Commons, and a little bit more of it when you were speaking to him, Lucy. It's about reinforcing his credentials as a champion of British national defence and the Western alliance of NATO.
Yeah, I think particularly important for Starmer coming after Jeremy Corbyn to draw a line under that era and make clear just how robust he is in terms of national security and supporting NATO. For Rishi Sunak, it's the inverse. He wants to show continuity with Boris Johnson. I think Rishi Sunak's job could become a bit harder because it seems to be that the consensus in the US for supporting Ukraine is increasingly fracturing as they're looking at some of their domestic problems, their economy. I think the Republican Party is increasingly questioning how much support Washington has given Kyiv. So that could make Rishi Sunak's job more difficult, but it also makes it more important that he's taking on this leadership role.
And I think that's so true. And the great thing about Zelensky is he knows the sort of cachet his name and his cause lends to individual politicians that adopt it. So he knows the power he's got. If Starmer says, "Oh, I'm handshaking with Zelensky," he knows the power of him standing next to Sunak in front of a tank. He knows what he confers on them and does it in a transactional way to say, "Well, all right, you can have that, but I want something in return." And of course, for him, the thing that is in return is existential. For these politicians, it's great for their egos, for their image. For him, it's about life and death. And I think that's why he's, in my mind, probably the best politician of our age right now.
Interesting. Well, I think a lot of people would probably endorse that. Well, I said not everyone. There's some criticism of Volodymyr Zelensky from the far left of politics. Some of them do not support Zelensky, but broadly, the opinion polls bear it out. There is a lot of support for the Ukrainian cause and that leader in particular. We'll talk about this again. No question at all about that